anonymous to the... No, I can't do it.
Like and subscribe.
Not so anonymous with eBay Recca.
This podcast is brought to you by our friends over at Village Sports at 941 West Pacheco Boulevard. Village Sports carries a wide variety of skate gear and skate apparel, everything from your skate decks to your clothing. They carry brands such as Huff, Vans, Thrasher, on and on. They also carry a wide variety of sports apparel, jackets, hats, beanies, all your new era fitted caps. You can also, whether you're looking to get yourself a fresh white tee for the weekend or a pair of Air Jordan 1s, retro Jordan 3s, he's also carrying a wide variety of Yeezy Boost and all your Vans shoes and needs. Go visit our friend James and make sure you check out his Instagram at Village Sports. They also have a Patterson location located at 1040 West Las Palmas Avenue, Suite A2. That Instagram is Village Skate Shop, at Village Skate Shop. Hey, thank you, Village Sports. I met Rich. It's funny because I was thinking about this earlier today, is I can't pinpoint the exact place that I met you at, right? But I remember the exact moment you made an impression on me. We were all gathered at Jared's house, right, heading to a men's breakfast in Burlingame. And we were figuring out who's going to ride with who in the car. And so me and you ended up in the car together, right? And I'm like, oh, we're going to have a nice light ride to Burlingame, right? And probably about 20 minutes in, we're into my childhood issues, right? I'm being broken down. And I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, this is supposed to be a nice light afternoon, right? And we're addressing core issues, right? And through that ride, I got to know you a lot better. And I learned that there's a lot to learn from this man, right? So this man's going to be important to me in my journey to hold him close, because there's going to be a time where I need some advice from this man, right? And so, I appreciate you, right? So I usually like to start this off by introducing the person and telling people what that person means to me and how they fit into my journey, right? So I always like to start this off by asking, what's your clean date, Rich?
So my clean date is June 15th, 1999. I've been clean over a little bit over 23 years now.
So what does that date mean to you?
It means everything to me. It is the pivotal point that my life took a turn on. And it took a turn in probably one of the most difficult situations and circumstances anybody can be in, right? But in the middle of all that madness, it was that day was the eye in the storm.
Right. So, and I always like to, because there's probably going to be some people listening to this that look at you, they look at me, and they're like, man, these people aren't like me. These people aren't addicts. These people don't know what it's like. So I always like to bring it all the way back, and I like to ask, what was life like for Rich? Where do you come from? I'm talking early childhood. What does it look like for Rich?
So it's a good question. And I guess you got a minute since you want to hear all this stuff.
Yeah,
right?
We got time.
So I'm Puerto Rican. I'm from the East Coast originally. So I was born in Brooklyn, New York. I'm from an area in Brooklyn called Brownsville. And so I've got a mother. I've never seen my father. I don't know what he looks like today. Well, you definitely can't be my father, but if anybody in this room was my dad, or to tell me was my dad, that they were my dad, I wouldn't know to tell them, no, you're not, Never seen him. And in fact, my mom never spoke about him. None of my family spoke about him. And And so, that always sat with me. It always sat. It was a big thing. And, I come from a household. I mean, you can imagine life in Brooklyn was difficult. Growing up was difficult. The neighborhood was difficult. We didn't have much money. We didn't have much any of that stuff. My mom had to work a couple of jobs, and certainly we had to do what we needed to do to get by. But it left us having to go through really some support, find support in other areas. And so I had to go to a babysitter after school, me and my baby sister. And while I was at that babysitter's, I was 7 years old, I was abused.
Right.
And that really changed my life for me. It really confused me as a child, and created some internal feelings in me that I wasn't aware of, and with a 7-year-old mind, I didn't know how to deal with. And so, my house, for the most part, was a house that everybody came to party when I was growing up, and at one of those family gatherings and parties that used to start out as a 5-year-old's baptism or birthday party and end up into late night partying and dancing, and sometimes my family members getting drunk and high and fighting each other. It was at one of those parties at 8 years old, right after I was molested as a child, man, that I had my first drink.
And so that childhood trauma led to a life of making certain types of decisions. I mean, I'd imagine there was a hard time trusting people, right? And what you talked about, not knowing your father, did that lead you to look at other people and put them in that role?
I spent a lot of time in my life searching for mentors. In recovery, we kind of say searching for sponsors. Well, I was searching for sponsors long before I was in recovery. I've been clean for 23 years. I've been searching for sponsors for, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
I say for about 55 years. I just turned 61 on the 27th of last month. And so most of my life, I've been watching people, looking for that father image, looking for somebody to lead, looking for somebody that I could make proud of me.
Yeah.
I needed that reinforcement because the basis of that trauma told me a couple of things. It told me that people weren't trustworthy. It told me that I needed to protect myself, and otherwise people were going to get me. Somehow or another, everybody wanted something from me. And, I never shared that. My mother passed away without ever knowing that happened to me. That never escaped my lips until I got clean, And as a result, I ended up acting out.
Yeah, and so like the images you seen, because I have a similar thing where I was raised in a house with young parents, right? And there's partying going on. So I thought that was normal. Right. I seen attention-seeking behavior, and I learned to act a certain way, right? And so with that as your experience at that point and seeing this, right, and then not having the father in the picture, like always people say, like, that's how people get involved with gangs, and the dad's not around looking for a father figure. Like, was that the case? I mean...
So, I think, so what happened was, because I was a kid, that fact that I didn't trust much prevented me from trusting the first people that I had contact with, which was my family. So I estranged myself from my family. And in those circumstances, what happened was, it was the streets that raised me. It was people outside of my home that I felt trust for. Because once again, like I tell you, man, I'm looking for somebody to fill this void of not having my father here. And I spent all this time blaming him, like for what had happened in my life, the things that were going on. Like, my mother was a good codependent, and this isn't to disparage my mom. She did the best that she could. But the men that she chose all used drugs. There was a lot of violence in my house growing up, so they beat on her, and those things affected me. And so I didn't want no part of that, but I still wanted a father figure, even though I was blaming my dad for everything that was going wrong in my house. And that perpetuated. The more time that I had those beliefs, the more that I worked to resolve these issues in my mind through a 7-year-old's eyes. Because what happens when somebody is traumatized is that trauma crystallizes and stunts the emotional growth of the individual at the point of trauma. So no matter what happened, how I was able to grow emotionally, the things in life I could adapt to and see, but I was still emotionally growing a little slower than everybody else. But this particular incident I had to view emotionally through the eyes of a 7-year-old, reason emotionally from the point of trauma's impact. And so, it created this big, vast chasm in myself, this belief in myself. It affected my ego, my pride. It affected how I viewed myself as a man or a young man. And it made me feel, those thoughts that were created of it made me feel less than. And so what we do is most of us overcompensate for what it is we feel about ourselves in secrecy. So, the streets was a good place for me to be. I became violent, aggressive. I wanted to do everything I could out there in the streets. And sooner or later, my mom seen my acting out, and it was like, we need to get out of here. New York is getting to you, right? And so she moved us from here to San Francisco.
Got it.
And so we moved into the Mission District, not knowing that it was the Mission District. I grew up on 24th Street, right between Treat and Folsom in San Francisco, California.
So, a lot of people may not know what Mission Street looks like during that time. And what was that, the 80s, the early 80s?
No, this was the 70s.
The 70s. So what is paint a picture for what Mission Street might have looked like?
So 24th and Mission looked like any socioeconomically challenged environment, and it was predominantly Latin.
Got it.
Predominantly Latin and Black. And so because of that, there was this sense of environment and family. See, I grew up in a time where if you was outside running around and Doña Teresa knew my mother and I got caught slipping and doing something wrong, everybody in the family would check you. You could literally get everybody on the streets that knew my mom. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I could get told what to do. And kind of that old, it takes a village to raise a child adage, right? And so there was this huge sense of pride, huge sense of community. And then there was this undercurrent that goes along with socioeconomically challenged environments. So there was this drugs and undercurrent, which once again, when I got here from New York, that's what I gravitated to.
So straight out of the oven into the fire,
basically.
Into
the fire, yeah. And, my mother had brought the boyfriend that she was with, who happened to be my sister's father, bought him from, they came from New York together. And so he was around a lot. And he was an IV drug user and heroin addict and an alcoholic. And there were a lot of fights going on in the house, and I think, the turmoil in me, at some point, I just couldn't deal with it no more, man. I just couldn't. At 14 years old, I left home.
So what does that look like, leaving home, living in San Francisco, 14 years old?
Well, actually, she moved, so in San Francisco, I caught a joyriding charge for being in a stolen car. And once again, my mom was like, oh, the streets is getting to you. We need to go. She had another boyfriend at this time that was that he was selling drugs. and he had this big home in LA. He had been trying to talk her into moving to Los Angeles to be closer to him. And me catching this joyriding charge, her having to come and pick me up from Hillcrest was like the final straw. So she moved to LA. And this is literally what happened. So we moved up to LA. I didn't like it, didn't want to be there. We lived in Bell, California. And so we got there during the summer, I remember, and I started school, and I've always played sports. I've been a sporter my whole life. And so I signed up for the football team, played football. You know, in LA they have one of those, you know how it gets smog filled?
Yeah. So
they have these smog outs. You can't, after school practice, if it's too smoggy and they call practice. And so I had gotten dressed. The whole football team had gotten dressed for practice that day. And they called it. We couldn't have practice. So instead of changing, I walked home in half of my football uniform. And I came in the house, and this guy had my mother. He was choking my mom out. It's funny, I'm remembering it as I'm talking to you, man. He was choking my mom out. And so I ran in there. My mom used to collect ashtrays from the hotels, all the expensive ashtrays, Alfred Dunhill, whatever it said. If it said something, she thought. And so she had them all on this kind of case by the front door, and I grabbed the ashtray and ran over there and broke it over his head, and he fell out. And then I went to jump on him again, and my mother jumped on me and hit me and slapped me and told me to stay out of business, and, you know, I've always been wrong and this and that, and it hurt. You know, I felt like my mom chose him over me, and trying to reason it with the mind that I was reasoning it with, you know, I persecuted my mom for that.
Yeah.
Reality is I got here and I began to work some steps and do some stuff around here. What I understood is my mom's had a rough life, her whole life. And she's been trying to take care of her kids. And even though this dude was on the other side of the line, you know, that he was committing crimes to be able to support the family, this was the best that my mom lived since I was a child. And here it was that I was challenging that for her. So she just reacted. But for me, that was the last night that I slept in my mom's house. So I went to a friend's house that night, jumped on a Greyhound, and came to San Francisco.
Back to San Francisco. And then so I'm imagining from this point forward is what led to the unmanageability and the chaos that caused you to change. So from the point, what does it look like? I mean, because even though home wasn't the best circumstance, it's still home.
Right.
And then you move out on your own with all this truth that you know, everything that you've seen. Like, what does that turn into? I mean,
turns into a shit show.
Yeah.
It's amazing, you know. I thought, check this out, EJ. I look at kids now that are 14 years old, and it makes me think to myself, how the hell did I ever come up with this idea
yeah,
that I could manage life at 14, that I was a man?
yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
I got a 14-year-old daughter. I know exactly what you're saying.
It's crazy, you know? But I did. I was supposed to come here to my Aunt Miriam's house. And when I got off the Greyhound bus, I never showed up to my Aunt Miriam's house. I actually lived on the roof right outside of the emergency entrance at San Francisco General Hospital.
Wow.
I lived on that roof for about 2.5 months till my Uncle David, who is the baby of 13 kids. My mom had 13. My grandfather had 13 kids, and he's the baby. And I'm the first grandchild. So we was raised like uncle, brother.
Got
you
it.
know? And until he paroled from San Quentin, and he found out I was on the streets. And, you know, he's from the streets. And so I was running around during the mission in the day, you know, and sleeping on this. There's this, it's still there. If you go to the emergency in San Francisco, on the side of it, of the side of the building, the emergency entrance, there's this little room that has the generator with one of those mushroom kind of tops,
Yeah.
right? And it blows hot heat. And so I grabbed some cardboard boxes, and in the nighttime, I used to fuck around and put them around this, excuse my language, I used to put them around this mushroom thing, and that's where I would sleep. And then in the daytime, I would hide all my cardboard in the bushes. And in the night, I'd sneak up there and do the same thing. And I was like that for about 2.5 months till my uncle paroled from prison and found me, and then brought me to come live with him.
And there's the next mentor.
And that's the next mentor.
And so
I adored him.
Yeah.
I thought he was everything that I wanted to be. And I honestly thought that you weren't a man until you went to prison.
Got it.
You know, he was a man because he was in San Quentin and dealing with all of that stuff. And he used to tell me war stories, and I would gobble that shit up, you know. And he was an IV drug user, man. He was a heroin addict. And so I never wanted to do them drugs. I never wanted to do heroin. Never wanted to do drugs because what I had seen it do. But I loved my uncle a bunch. And so he was my mentor. And life got pretty crazy living with him until he got busted again. And then I had to leave, you know. The house was gone. You know what happens when you get busted and everything's gone. I mean, he was breaking into houses, doing breaking and enterings. I'm driving the car, don't even have a license. You know, this is what my life was like. It was one event after another that only consisted of survival, an animalistic level of survival. And so I went and I lived. I got a room in the Tenderloin. You know, I had some money. I'd been doing burglaries with him. I had some money, and back then, you know, you could.
What's the Tenderloin look like? Because a lot of people, they hear the Tenderloin. But what is, you know? So
the Tenderloin is an area on Upper Market, Lower Nob Hill in San Francisco, California. It is full of hotels, and it might have been in the 60s and the 50s a real prominent area. And right now it was run down. There was a bunch of homeless people there, a bunch of addicts there, people on SSI living in the hotel rooms, using hotel rooms as their primary residence. And so to speak, it was the dregs of society running around there, you know? And shit, you can go down there at any age and rent a room. They didn't have no age requirements. If you had some money, that's it. That was enough. And so I rented a hotel on Post and Taylor. I had a room. It was a piss in the sink hotel. You know, the bathroom down the hall, only a sink in the room. And that's where I was. And I had a friend from school, Johnny Wong. And I didn't really know everything that Johnny was into, but I knew Johnny was pretty serious. He was into the triads and the gangs. And actually later on, him and his brother were a part of what they call, what's known as the Jade Dragon killings in San Francisco, where his gang, trying to chase a member of another gang, walked into the Jade Dragon restaurant and shot everything up.
Wow.
And killed a bunch of people in the restaurant trying to get this rival gang member. And it was a real famous thing. They ended up in prison for the rest of their life. But before all of this happened, me and Johnny were cool. And I didn't know exactly how it was. I was going to make it happen. And I bumped into Johnny one day, and Johnny said, "Richie, don't worry about it. I got something for you." And so he turned me on to drugs, and hence started my career of selling drugs. So I began to sell China White. I began to sell mescaline. That was the first thing that he gave me. Sugar cube acid. And that's what it was I was doing in the Tenderloin.
And that's just life at this point. Like it's pretty hard to find hope in a situation like that. I mean, and so I'm imagining you qualify, right? Like people listening to this now, they're probably like, holy shit, right? And so going from that point forward, I mean, I got to imagine the fun and games end at some point, and you end up in trouble as well, right? I mean,
yeah,
because that can't go on forever.
I mean, what happened was my uncle, another uncle, came from Los Angeles to find me. I had pulled a girl from school, my little girlfriend at the time. And once again, I'm trying to be a man, and we got pregnant. She was living with me in that hotel room. We were both 16 years old, and she's a couple of months older than me, and she's the mother of all my children. And that's my oldest daughter there, Diamond, who I was pregnant with. And my uncle heard that I was having a kid, and he flew in from LA and said, man, what are you doing? He also sold drugs. What are you doing, Richie? Like, this is not what you want. And what are you going to do for this kid? And, man, you'll never have your dad. And I've heard you talk about it. And I loved this uncle. This uncle always looked out for me, and he was another one that I looked up to. And he said, man, what are you going to be able to provide for her? What are you, selling drugs? You're going to have your baby grow up here in this room? He said, I don't want you to become like me. Go to the military. Go to the military. It's going to let you buy a home. It's going to help you with your education. It's going to give you some structure. It's going to give you a check where you can support yourself. It's going to give you medical care so you can provide for your child. That's what I did.
So you signed up for the Army
I signed up for the Navy.
The Navy.
And then when I got into boot camp, I signed up for SEAL school. And I'm a combat veteran. And yeah, that's a whole nother story.
That's a whole nother story.
But what was supposed to save me and everything did. But my experiences in the military and what it was that I went through created more trauma for me in combat.
So when you look at all that stuff, so these are the solutions that are presented to you at the time, right? Another mentor presents another solution. You go do your time in the military. You come back with more trauma. Like, what does life look like after that, right? So you have all these truths that you were raised with. You get a solution. You go overseas. You add to all the stuff that's already happened to you.
Right.
And so then you come out of the military with a whole new set of tools, right?
Yeah.
I got to imagine it just made you a more dangerous person at that point.
Yeah.
You know, and so
Yeah.
what age did you get out of the military?
So I went in when I was 17. My grandmother signed a letter for me to enter the military early. And I came home when I was 20.
Okay.
And I came home. I'm diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. And the coding stamp is what we call complex trauma, meaning a trauma put on top of another trauma. So double traumas kind of working that are significant. And so we're talking about my early childhood trauma and my military trauma. And I didn't know how to deal with it. You know, in the military, once again, you don't talk about shit.
Right.
You know, the last thing to do was to admit that I was having problems and I was thinking a little sideways, and I was always alert. You know, those things aren't in the military. They're just, I'm a super soldier. Yeah.
Yeah, feelings are frowned upon, right?
Right. And so, yeah, you're not going to walk up to somebody and say, you know, I'm feeling a little vulnerable today, brother. Can I get a hug?
Can I get a hug? Right?
It ain't happening, man.
So you got crossed up wiring and then more crossed up wiring. So you
Right.
come out at 20 and now you have...
I can't sleep.
Yeah.
I
You
don't
got a
wanna
4-year-old
leave
child.
nowhere. Yeah, I've got to take care of my own child. I got to find a life, and I'm back in country. I'm back in the world, and fuck, you know, society wants me to go coach softball and go get me a job in a warehouse and go to church on Sunday. And fucking last week I was shooting at people and getting shot at. And so it just didn't fit. And nobody here, it felt like nobody understood what I was going through. All my brothers were gone. They were either left back there or they were dead. Every night I was having real crazy dreams. And so things progressed from there. I mean, I had to have a fifth of Jack Daniels every night when I went to sleep. And it wasn't to knock me out. It was, I would go to sleep and have these horrible dreams. I'd have what we call night terrors. And I'd wake up drenched in sweat. My wife was sleeping in the other room because it was dangerous to sleep with me. I could reach out and hurt somebody if she moved in the wrong way. And you know, I'd just have to pound. I'd just have to pound some alcohol till I passed out.
So drugs became the solution, right?
The solution. And then somewhere along the line, I found heroin.
Right back.
And yeah. And so the things that I didn't want to do, my uncle came home from prison. And again, and so I gravitated to him again, and he's using. And at this time, I'm back to selling drugs. And so now to keep him out of jail, I'm trying to keep him out of jail. So I'm buying his drugs so he doesn't have to steal for drugs. All I want you to do is hang with me and help me do this. And then one day, you know, I just made the decision that I want to try this. And it was like I found home, EJ. Like all of a sudden, you know, everything that I was struggling with just went away from the moment that I tried it. All the fear, all the anxiety, you know, all the tension was gone when I found that. And it was like a home. It was like a home. And it was, you know, it took me, like you say, it took, like anybody, it took me on a run. But it only took me on a run for like 6 years. When I think about my history, I could tell you a whole bunch of stories. But the truth of the matter is my drug history from heroin to the time where it really ended was only 6 years long.
So what does that look like at the end? Like, what's the point? Because we talk about like the gift of desperation, right? Like, what was the thing that made Rich say, like, I can't do this no more? Like, something's got to change.
So I'll lead you to that, because the last time I was on the street wasn't the gift of desperation, right? I was in a crack house. You've heard this story before, but I'll say it for your audience, yeah? So I was in a crack house in the Army Street Projects in San Francisco with an escapee from Delancey Street who had left Delancey Street with a female. And I knew this dude, Mac Blake. And we're in this house, and I'm just begun trying crack, adding crack to my whole cocktail, right? And so we're in this crack house, sitting on a mattress that's on the floor, smoking crack, and he's talking a whole bunch of stuff. And we're smoking back and forth. And finally, at one point, he takes a full pull off the pipe and he looks over at me. And as he's blowing out the smoke, he says, you know, Rich, you really look fucked up, man. I think you need a program. That's kind of a cold piece of work, right? Here I am with an escapee telling me I need to go into a program. Yeah. But that's how bad things had gotten. But one of the things that this woman that he got away from the program with, that he left with, was a bank teller before she began using. And she had told him all kinds of stuff which he conveyed to me about being able to rob a bank. And so I followed.
Sounded like a pretty good idea at that time.
And very quickly I did it and was arrested. I'm not successful. You know, guys that say, oh, I got this long criminal history, to sound good, I didn't get that piece then. Oh, I got this long criminal history, until one day somebody said, it must mean that you're not pretty successful at crime. You got busted a lot, Rich.
Yeah, that's it.
Right? So I got busted and they sent me to prison for bank robbery.
And that was it. I mean, because not too many people get reformed in prison, right? Like, no. I mean, that's a misconception, right? Oh, he's gonna go to prison. It's gonna change them, right?
I mean, the military had taught me how to be a leader of men. It certainly taught me how to kill and not be killed. And And at the beginning of my sentence, my mother passed away. Passed away right after I had talked to her. I was in West Block in San Quentin, and I hustled the phone call by working my way into the cleaning crew, the tea attenders. And a cop that knew me allowed me to have a phone call because I told him I wanted to call my mom. And I called her, and she sounded sick. She offered me money, which made me feel ashamed, you know. And I told her I was going to try to get a call the next day. I went to my cell and locked it up, and I went to the chow hall the next morning when they unlocked us. And when I got back from chow, the chaplain was standing in front of my cell. My mom had had a massive heart attack throughout the night and passed away. And so, yeah, I didn't know how to act. I didn't know how to take it. I didn't know how to process it, you know. And I had become almost desensitized to death through my military experience, but sensitized to it. I don't know if that, I felt it deeply, but I didn't acknowledge the feelings. And that's how it was that I learned to deal with death in the military, right? And with this was different. It racked me. I felt a whole bunch of guilt of leaving home at 14 and leaving my mom in that situation where I knew she was getting abused, EJ. I didn't know how to act, man. And so, you know, I began to act out. And I was already clicked up. And, you know, they sent me to the hole the day that they told me they wasn't allowing me to go to my mom's funeral. And when I got to the hole, man, I never cried. I spent 12 years in prison. And after I got out of prison, 5 years, it took me time to be able to let go of those tears. I mean, you can't act like a goldfish when you're swimming with sharks. I was scared that if I started crying, I wouldn't be able to stop crying. And my homies and everybody in prison would see it as a weakness, so I couldn't allow it. And so my emotions stayed bottled up, and I just continued to act out. So I was supposed to they gave me 12 years with half, EJ. I was supposed to do halftime on that 12-year sentence. And I was one of those guys that went to jail in jail. So I spent almost 8 years in the SHU program behind all the bullshit that I was doing in prison, you know? And here's where the gift of desperation comes in. Or do you have a question that you
No, I want to hear this. You built it up perfect.
Yeah. And so now at this time, I've been in prison for 11 years and 4 months. And we just finished having a riot on the yard. And so we're all locked down. And I'm in Solano on the 2 yard, one of the times that I was actually on the main line. And we just finished having a riot. The whole yard's locked down. And I was in a cell with a guy who was doing triple life. Older guy, had been down for a long time. So here was another kind of guy that I manifested as a father figure. And so I began to pass blood in my cell. And I had been feeling stuff, but I began to pass blood in my stools. And it had been going on throughout the lockdown. He was noticing it now. And finally he said, you know, Rich, I think you need to go to medical. Something's going on here, but it's not natural and you need to go to medical. So we filled out a ducat. Now I was scared to do that. Let me share this with you. I was scared to do that because in my thing, in what it was that I was associated with, during the lockdown when the yard's on drama, if you were to fill out a ducat to go see medical, and for some reason they incapacitated you to where you couldn't be on the line, or they locked you in the hospital during that, it's viewed as a cowardice act.
Wow.
It's viewed as a cowardice act. You know? And so I was scared to go to medical because, yo, man, if something happens and this is serious and they lock me in the hospital, it's going to look like I'm running from the funk, right? And I was holding position on the yard, right? And so it really would have been bad, man. And so, but I went because he suggested it. And they filled out, they did an examination on me, and then they took me back to my cell. And then 3 days later, the cops show up at the cell and took me back to medical. The yard's still locked down. And one of the most unnatural things is for a convict to be on the yard when nobody else is on the yard. It's a funny ass, it just doesn't feel normal. We never get that kind of experience, right? And so they take me to medical, and the doctor there tells me that I got stage 4 colon cancer, that's what my results show, and that it had metastasized. It was all over my body, and I had, in their estimation, 6 months to live. So after doing these 11 years and 4 months with 8 months left to do, him telling me that I had 6 months to live, you know, it was a blow. If somebody tells you that your life flashes in front of your eyes when you die, that's bullshit, they're lying, or they ain't never experienced it. Because my experience is that my entire life flashed in front of my eyes. I realized exactly who it was, what I had become, what I had done. You know, at this time I had 3 children, and I hadn't been there in none of their lives. That daughter that you're looking at right there was at UC Berkeley. I hadn't helped her with homework, an assignment, hadn't told her that I was proud of her. I hadn't been there at all. My oldest, Diamond, had presented me my granddaughter, who just gave me my great-grandchild. I had met her and held her for the first time in my visiting room. My son, Richie, I conceived in prison. He had never seen me loaded because he just never seen me fucking free. Like everything that I persecuted my father for, EJ, I realized in that moment that I had become. And I actually did those same things in the lives of my children. I swear to God, brother, it was powerful.
Wow.
It was powerful.
So for you, this is the shifting point, right? Like and many would see a hopeless situation. You basically get the news you're dying in prison.
Right.
So some people might just say, "Fuck it, I'm just gonna continue to do this."
Right.
So what is that? So after you get this news, right, where does that take you? Like your decision-making process, you know, because at this point, I'm hearing your story and I'm like, well, at this point, you don't know any better. So how does that shift happen? I mean...
It wasn't for recovery.
Yeah.
I mean, I had been to some H&I meetings.
Right.
In prison, but never to find recovery. We used to fill out ducats and go to the H&I meetings because that was a place that we could meet other homeboys from the other yard.
And politic.
Plot harm on another man. Pass drugs back and forth. Pass information back and forth. And we'd sit there in the back of the meeting and disrespect the meeting while these guys, you know, eat up all the cookies and drink all the fucking coffee and talk and chitter-chatter while the meeting was going on, man. And these guys, these wonderful men, would love me until I loved myself. Because very easily they could have told the cop and killed that off. And they never did. But it wasn't there that I thought, I want to get clean. That's another way of life. I got back to my cell. The cop dropped me back off, and I got into my cell, and I told Buzz, man, yo, everything that's going on. And I fell to my knees. This is the first time I cried in front of another man. And what I asked, I fell on my knees and I began to pray as I was crying. And I didn't ask God to help me get clean. I told God, I promise you, if you just let me live, if you help me with this, I promise you I'll be a better father to my daughters. Give me a chance to be a better father to my daughters. That was my prayer. That's what the desperation brought out in me.
Right. So I'm assuming you lived a lot longer than 6 months, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So like, how does that happen? So do they start giving you medical care in there, or they just let you write it out?
They wanted to do surgery on me, and I was like, shit, you're not doing surgery on me. Screw you. And the reality was, I was gonna die before I let them cut on me. Right. So I watched them cut on my grandfather. Mm-hmm. My grandfather died from colon cancer. And this uncle I told you about that advised me to go to the military, he died of cancer. Both of them had surgery in the 80s, and 90 days later, they were dead. So I wasn't going that route. I was going to let it kill me, but I was going to fight to try to get to the gate. And go figure, I was fucking misdiagnosed by a prison doctor.
So
I did have cancer, but I had stage 2, early stage 2 colon cancer, not stage 4.
So a misdiagnosis gave you the gift that helped change your life, right?
And I think this was God, because everything that was going on in my life, he needed to shake me and wake me up, because I was a hardhead.
Yeah.
Right? He need to be like, yo, man, I need to grab your attention. Get this desperation so you can see this path. And so he is now the identification needed to find the way, because all I wanted, my prayer was to just be a better father, just be a better man. But I had no idea how I was going to do that. So I'm a high control parolee. I paroled with 97 points, which was...
What does that mean?
So every time you have an infraction in prison, and they give you a 115, you go to the hole, and they give you 6 points on top of the points that you have for your crime.
So you're like Steph Curry, and you're racking up points.
I'm racking up points. Yes, I'm racking up points. So high control parolees don't have a chance to wait 24 hours after they're released. They have to show up to the parole office the very same day they're released. The very same day. And so I showed up like I was supposed to the parole office. I was just happy to make it to the gate, Jack. I got to the parole office, and I, according to my prayer, man, I was just happy, Jay. And I asked my parole officer for the first time for some help. I want to change my life. He said, well, I want you to go downstairs and see the base hand man. He's in the office down there. And so I go to the base hand office after I see him and drop a bottle, give him a urine screen. And yo, man, I turn the corner in the office and I see this dude in there. And I know this guy. And he asked me what I'm doing here. And I say, I'm looking for the base hand man. He says, well, you found him, Richie. I'm the base hand man. This guy knows me. So when I came here to San Francisco, and I lived on 24th between Treat and Folsom, right outside my bedroom window was Galan's Bar. It's a bar that sat on the corner of 24th and Treat. And this man used to sell dope on that corner. And my stepdad used to run bags for him. You know, he would get customers for him until he earned a bag of dope for himself. And then they would come in my house and get loaded in my bathroom, do their drugs together in my bathroom. And he knew me as a kid. I knew his sons. And now here he was, 6 years, clean. I knew he was a dope fiend. And now here he is working for the state of California as a base hand man, helping people get into treatment.
So God's laying the pathway for you.
He's directing through identification where the path is that he wants me to go. Now, it could be how anybody else sees it, but it's how I need to view that.
Yeah.
This is what works for me. This is how I see that. This was my divine intervention, right? And so after a whole bunch of banter, because you got to remember, I just finished doing 12 flat, right?
Yeah.
And so now he's trying to send me to a program in San Mateo, Project 90, that you got to stay for 90 days and it's an all-male program. I'm like, yo, man, I was just dying a minute ago. Can I see some companionship? You know what I'm saying? You want to send me around a whole bunch of men. He like, Richie, don't run from me. If you run from this, you might not never get back. I never forget those words. His name's Paul Galindo. I love this man. He's still clean today. I've watched him do some phenomenal shit for his sons, his family, and raise his kids, his grandkids, adopt them. I mean, amazing stuff, man. And so I went to a program, changed my life. 90 meetings in 90 days, and it introduced me to the fellowship that I'm now a part of, that I call home, that has saved my life. Things changed from that point on.
So, I mean, what does that look like for you? I mean, you led a whole life up to this point. You know, you had certain truths in your head, and I mean, in a lot of instances, they rung true, right? These are the survival mechanisms that got you to where you're at and got you there alive.
Right.
So for somebody that their thought process is so set, like, what does that look like for you? You know, I mean, like, I'm sure it was hard to handle you.
Yeah.
You know, like,
yeah.
You weren't the easiest guy to love, I'm sure.
You know, I think one of the things that was beneficial about my desperation was that it gave me the perception that everything could stop. Everything could end on this particular moment. It's pretty fearful when you think about it. But the benefit was that it made me mindful of the blessings that were around. And it gave me pure vision of everything that was going on behind me, everything that I had been a part of. And although I didn't know the steps on how it was that I needed to change and what it was that I needed to change, I had that core belief. I heard somebody in the program say that the one thing that I needed to change was everything. And so I began to do that. I literally began to believe that everything about me has to change. That I can't think like that. I can't live like that. I can't act like that. And as hard as it was on natural reflex, because a lot of things I was on automatic pilot with, I had a conscious level that I needed to change that I needed to combat that. I'm telling you, I went from who it was that I was. I would not cross the street if the light wasn't green. That's how pure. I mean, we used to have to go to programs. We used to have to go to meetings after the day in treatment in Project 90 and take ourselves to the treatment, to the meeting. And we had to go in partners because we were in treatment. So I had to gather with somebody else in the house, and we're going to make this meeting tonight. Let the house manager know, and then we go to the meeting. No fucking body wanted to go with me. Why? Because Richie didn't cross the street in the middle of the street. He didn't leave on a red light. You could be late for the meeting that would make me in trouble, or Richie wanted to leave way too early for the meeting. He wasn't sneaking on the back of the bus. He was paying all the fees for the bus that he needed to pay. He wasn't saving his tokens. I was set in my mind that I needed to do everything right because I was a criminal. I felt like I was a scumbag. And if I was to turn this around, I needed to be a role model for these kids. I needed to be somebody that they could respect because I knew I had no respect coming from my children. And that was important to me.
Yeah.
It really was important to me. And I was scared to death that they weren't going to allow me in their life. And so I really wanted to go there, and that's what I was focused on. You know, and I heard a counselor in treatment told me one day, he said, if you don't know how to act, Richie, if you don't know how to act, your kids are so important to you. This is how I want you to behave in any situation. I want you to think that there's a camera following you around. And when the situation gets tough, I want you to remember or believe that on the other side of that screen, your children are watching you. And would it be okay them seeing what you're doing? And if it wouldn't be okay, don't do it. Fuck, I used that for like my first 5 years. It resonated with me in my spirit because I didn't know. I heard another dude at a meeting say, if you want to learn how to be a man, pay your bills. That shit resonated with me. Shit, I didn't have a job. Other than the military, my job was getting loaded.
Yeah.
You know, and so these things began to set a formulation of what I needed to do. My sponsor, I picked a sponsor early on in treatment, and Jesse told me, Richie, you always look like you. I used to stand in the back of the meeting, you know, and I thought I was being nice and being welcoming, and he said, you always looking like you're going to hurt somebody. You know, you need to learn to smile. I want you to get in front of the mirror every day. And you hear these stories. My sponsor really told me that shit. I want you to smile. I want you to practice smiling. You need to soften your appearance because you're unapproachable like that. And the very thing that you want is eluding you. You need this fellowship. I mean, the guidance was so integral in early recovery that it was important with what it was I needed. And I literally, EJ, felt as if I was this raw blob of clay. And that I was remaking myself anew, and that people were pouring into me in this fellowship. And once again, I was searching for father figures. I found one, though, but this time I was moving in a community of people that had morals and values. They were guided by the principles of the program. And I was slick enough to pick out the winners then. You know, the military taught me how to move. The streets taught me how to see people and look beyond what it was that they were trying to show you and see what was underneath the veneer, you know? And so I could cut through the bullshit, you know, and find the winners in the program. And that's who I hung with, man.
So, and that's what and it's funny because like a lot of people get clean, they start changing their life and they expect everything to come back right away. Yeah. Right. And I mean, so I got to imagine you missed a huge chunk, especially of your oldest children's lives. Yeah. Like, what did it take for you? I mean, the persistence of doing all the right things over and over and over again. I mean, what did that process look like? How did you stay patient? How did you rebuild those relationships?
Well, I'll tell you this. I stayed patient as a result of guidance because I wasn't patient at all. So I thought the 9th step was about saying, I'm sorry. You know, I had to have some direction to say that there, you know, my sponsor told me, I want you to look up the 9th step and see if you find I'm sorry. If you can find one I'm sorry written in the 9th step, then I'll let you go and apologize to your kids. Because I wanted to apologize right away. I wanted to, you know, I didn't have no concept of what an amends was like. And in the dictionary defines it as to repair and make whole. That has nothing to do with I'm sorry. I said a whole bunch of I'm sorries just before I did the same shit that hurt you in the first place. My entire life, I'm sorry didn't mean nothing. My kids didn't want to hear that. Anybody in my family didn't want to hear that. That was a broken record for me. And so it took time and patience. You know, I expected them after a couple of years of me doing the right thing to come back. But I needed to be in the process. I had spent my entire life running from me. And so as I began to work the steps, as I began to have a concept of a higher power, it gave me the strength to be able to engage in a 4th step. You know, after I worked the first 3 steps, and I had a concept of God, but I believed that God was a punishing God with all the shit that happened to me, so I didn't want to have nothing to do with God. This was a reintroduction. The beauty about my fellowship is that we're promised to God of our own understanding. I could make him of whatever it was he's choosing, you know? And so he looked like a little homeboy. And he talked to me like I talk to you. You know, I didn't have to pray according to some kind of doctrine or anything like that. I could just talk to him. And I never called him God. I called him Father because I had been looking for a father my whole life. And that gave me the courage to do a 4th step. And a lot of people are worried about the 4th and the 5th step, but that's not the real steps that give you freedom. It's the 6th and 7th step that introduce you to yourself. You get a modicum of freedom in the 4th and 5th step, dealing with resentments, dealing with those issues, dealing with your history, dealing with those things. But it's the 6th and the 7th step that frees you because it introduces you to you. It really does. Those are the steps that we're not sharing in the fellowship that have the power to introduce yourself to yourself, that it has the instruction, the direct roadmap on what needs to change and what you need to contradict and what it is that you need to add some growth in, and what areas you need to be compassionate in, and what areas you have been self-centered in, self-seeking and selfish in. It points it out, who you have hurt along the way as a result of your actions. Those things are there that consist to show you like, yo, man, this is what I got to work on. Those are powerful steps. And as I began to do that and work my way into the 9th step and understand that these amends had to be made all along as I'm growing, I'm showing my kids that I ain't going nowhere. See, part of the deal about this was trust. Like, I didn't trust nobody because I was abused and traumatized. My kids, although they weren't abused and traumatized, were abused and traumatized by my behavior, by my non-presence, by the images and the circumstances that I put them in. And so because of that, they didn't want to trust. They didn't want to trust their dad. It took time to build that up. You know, I remember my son used to come up to me, AJ, at family functions and give me that shoulder hug. You know that shoulder hug we get from some women when they don't want to get too close? He was being dutiful. You know, my daughters would take me to Marie Callender's for Father's Day, and my son never showed up. You know, I was 5 years clean, and my daughter walked up to me one day and handed me a copy of the keys to her house. Told me, Daddy, you can come over anytime you want. I was 5 years clean. When my son Richie showed up with this picture on Father's Day. This is how I met him. When he was born, I told you he was conceived in prison. When he was born, they brought him to me in a baby visit. That's me holding my son.
Wow.
There was a social worker in there doing her thesis on incarcerated fathers and their children. And she walked up to me during the baby visit. That's her in the background. She walked up to me during the baby visit and said, listen, I'm doing this thesis, and I want to know if I can interview you. And I'm like, get the fuck out of here. You can't interview me. I don't want to hear that shit. And she's like, I'll also take pictures. And if you let me interview you, I'll send you a copy of all the pictures I take of you and your son. And shit, there was something in it for me. I'm like, sure, I'll answer your questions. And make sure to send me the pictures. I went back to my cell after the whole thing. And she never sent the pictures. Fucking 2 months later, she never sent the pictures. And I'm like, dirty ass shit. I should have known better, right? So now I did 12 years. Yeah. And now I'm 5 years clean. My son shows up. He ain't never showed up. And he shows up with this bookcase. This is how he looked. This is how he looked as a baby. He showed up with this case and I rip it open and it said, Dad, you're the best. And here's the black and white picture. That social worker had sent the pictures not to me, but to my last known address, which was his mother's house. And somehow or another, he got this picture. And my son had been hanging on to this picture for like 12 years. And now here it is. I'm 5 years clean and it showed up.
Waiting for you to show up.
Man, it was unbelievable. And so that's what it takes. It takes the patience of being patient, because until then, this kid wouldn't talk to me. So I bought him a sidekick when I had 2 years clean, just because my sponsor told me, you need to talk. If he's not talking to you, you need to text him every day and tell him that you love him. Tell him that you ain't going nowhere. I was texting that kid for 3 years, AJ. He wouldn't text me back. I'm like calling my sponsor like, this is some disrespectful ass shit. I'm paying this bill every month. And my sponsor's like, patience. You gotta have patience. It's not on your time, Richie. It's on his time. You hurt him. You don't have the right to say when his trust should activate. He ain't working on your schedule. You're working on his. Be patient. Pray. Pray for patience. Pray for patience. Pray for patience. And in 5 years, he showed up with this. You've heard me talk about this in my share before.
Yes, I have.
That's finally the picture.
Now, see, that's powerful right there.
That's the picture. I've had it in my office all these years, man.
Because I've known you now for the better part of 6 years, right? Since I got out of treatment. And sitting here with you, I'm learning so much about you, right? And even I knew your past, but not all of it. And it still amazes me to look at the man that's in front of me right now, knowing the things that you've been through, right? And talking about that trauma layered on top of that trauma. And then the person I know today, which is a beautiful, warm, caring, loving man, right?
Thank you, brother.
And I can say that now because the program's released some stuff in me to where I can actually look at you and give you a compliment, right? Yeah. And so like now we're making huge leaps forward, right? So now you're 5 years clean. What you do today is you help men, women, find this way of life, this new way of life.
Yeah.
So where does that shift come in? Because now you're trusted with other people, right? I mean, like that's like a mind bend to hear all the stuff that you've been through, learning a new way of life. You're starting to get things back, and now you're helping other people get things back.
Yeah.
Like, and staying in recovery yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, how does that passion continue with you? I mean, 23 years later.
So I've been on this kick over the past year around the difference between respect for my disease and reverence for my recovery. And I think as we've been here for a while, we lose the reverence for our recovery. And if we're still clean, we have a healthy respect for our disease, but it's not the same. And I've been writing about this for about the past 4 or 5 months in areas that demonstrate to me where I've lost the reverence for recovery. And I view the reverence for my recovery as that need, that concept that I knew for sure that everything in my life that was positive, derived from my connection to my fellowship. That through this God-given program, that I had been offered an opportunity to live a second life, to live a first-class life, as opposed to that second-class life I was living before I got here. And I knew that if I shied away from the program, that not only would I most likely get loaded, but more importantly, I would lose who I am as a man. Because it's the principles that remind me about compassion and love and perseverance. And it reminds me of the things that I need to be the man that I respect today, that I respect and like about myself. And so that's been a journey to be able to find that, man. And throughout this process, man, I always felt like I did so much wrong in the world. I mean, EJ, I've been a part of the evil that men do, that I needed to balance the scales. And for me, that was to be a helper. I feel like my God just shook me off of that dust and put me over here for a reason. And so early on, when I got out of treatment, man, I got a job in recovery, and I've been working in the field ever since. You know, and my sponsor, who was educated himself, sent me to school. And I didn't have a high school education. I had to go, I was so embarrassed about it, you know, that I would sneak and go into Samuel Gompers, a high school. It was a junior high school back then, but a junior high school in San Francisco, and go to English as a second language night class to get my GED. And I went to City College of San Francisco and got my associate's degree. And from then I continued to go to school, man. And I did that as I worked, you know. And because for me, every level of education that I achieved allowed me greater access to be able to help more people. And all I wanted to do was help. Like my life had turned around. Like I'm living outside of a dream, brother. This room that we sitting in is fuck 2 cells. I lived in half of this room with another man for fucking 12 years. You know? I viewed the world through a slat. You know? I mean, the things that I've been given and have achieved, and the freedom that I have, the love that I get from my kids, I can never repay that stuff back. But the only way I continue to have it is that I continue to give. You know, a program taught me that I don't keep what I have by giving it away unless I give it away. But more importantly, I move that on to society. I need to be the change that I want to see in the world. I need to treat you like I want you to treat my kid, like I want you to treat me. I need to treat him and respect him in the way that I want him to treat his family. I need to be a role model in that. And I don't believe that nobody, based on my story, can't make that change. I mean, I finished school. You know my story. Those degrees that are on the wall, I completed a master's degree in social work in 2007. I've been able to work nationally and internationally. I'm one of 2 therapists that helped Amsterdam. I was asked to go to Amsterdam. I lived there for over 18 months and helped that country develop its first abstinence-based treatment program in its entire history. Like, they lent harm reduction model of treatment to the world. And they believe that. They're a socialistic society.
What's harm reduction?
Harm reduction is a concept of recovery and treatment that says whatever promotes the least impact on society, and the least impact on the individual is a good road to take. How that relates into interaction with somebody and their disease is it's the belief that if you're doing heroin, it's creating you to commit crimes, hurt your family, and deteriorating your body, then what we want you to do is to stop using heroin, but it's okay to continue to drink. It's okay to use marijuana. It may be even okay to use a little cocaine, but the drug that created all the problems, that's the harm. And so we want you to utilize the path of the least resistance and then begin to think your way through your issues. And they lived on that. That ideology fits. You know, the Dutch have a socialistic country. So they believe in society as a whole and unity as a whole. And they ran on that for years. They lent that to the world. I mean, we have methadone programs and harm reduction models here in the United States based on Jelinek's science. You know, this science has created what's called Jelinek's curve, which talks about the progression of the disease and the regression of the disease. And if you're studying to get a certificate in drug and alcohol studies, everybody has to know that. It's something that you have to be familiar with. I mean, we utilize this stuff. And after years of living on this, they figured out that it doesn't help. Even if we give somebody state-sanctioned opium or state-sanctioned methadone, at the end of the line, it still ruins your body. And that still creates an impact to society. And it's not the path of least resistance. So they reached out to the United States, who are known as the kind of authorities on abstinence-based treatment. And I was lucky enough, blessed enough, to be asked and helped by Roland Williams, and went over there and shit. I spent time working with the Dutch government to help them create oversight. Spent time helping Roland refine the model of the treatment center. I worked with the School of Amsterdam University to be able to help develop a curriculum to teach their psychiatrists and their helpers on how to adapt this model into their education. I was the first in the first abstinence-based treatment program in that country's history. To date, they have redeveloped that model 47 times. Now they're doing abstinence-based treatment in Holland, in the Netherlands, like it's the thing to do. I was a part of that. I was given that opportunity by this stuff here, man.
From living on the top of the hospital or sleeping on the generator to stay warm to...
Yeah.
Man, that's amazing. So let me ask you this. I often like to ask, because there's probably somebody that's going to listen to this program or this podcast, and they're thinking they may have an issue, right? Or they're not sure if they have an issue, or they may want some help but not know how to get help. Like, what would you tell that person? Like, what's a good first step for somebody that may be struggling in silence?
I think we don't want to say, let me say this, let me challenge this. There is no addict that's struggling in silence. Let me say that. Everybody that is using some substance to the level past abuse is not struggling in silence. They're struggling in secrecy. There's a difference. If they were struggling in silence, they would be oblivious to the fact that they got a problem.
Yeah.
But late at night, when you're alone, or when the distractions slow down, and it occurs to you that this has gone over the edge, like this is too much, this is wrong, I'm messing up, I'm blowing it. If you're having those thoughts, then you want to take a look at what your problem is and how you can fix it. Don't wait for circumstances or society to put you into a position that you're backed into a corner. And let me say this, there is no wrong reason or no wrong time to start doing the right thing. So I don't have no judgments. But if somebody's in that position and you're listening to me now, take the opportunity based on what you're already telling yourself to get some help. And an easy way to reach out is to walk into a 12-step fellowship and find some support there. And if you've got a problem with doing that and you try it and it doesn't work, and you do that first because you don't want to go to treatment, my suggestion is that run that course. And if it doesn't work, make a contract with yourself that I'm going to try this. And if it fails, I'm going to try to go get some professional help. Professional help saved my life. And most of the people that I know, there's more people in the fellowship that I'm a part of that went to treatment and then connected with the fellowship for ongoing support, then there are people who just walked into a meeting, got clean, and stayed clean. So there is no concrete path on how you get clean, but there's a whole bunch of people who have benefited from getting some professional help, some help with it. And if you think about it, man, everybody's had guidance on how to use, where to cop from, how to use it, how to not waste it, how to figure out how to get more of it when it comes to our dope. And all of a sudden, folks seem to have a problem with getting some direction on how to stop doing all of that shit, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you're telling yourself that you're better than the dope, because I used to tell myself, man, dope don't use me, I use dope. Dope ain't in control, I'm in control. I used to tell all those lies to myself until I couldn't tell them no more. You know, and so if you're in that part of the process, then it may be your process that you got to get there. But I'm telling you, if you're already having those thoughts, it's in a no-win situation, because the characteristics of addiction is, the one major point is that you are at a stage that you cannot effectively dictate when you're going to start, how much you're going to use, and when you're going to stop. When you're going to start using, when you're going to start drinking, how much you're going to drink, and when you're going to stop drinking. If you can do that, if you can go and sit down and say, oh, I'm going to have one glass of red wine with dinner, and then the next morning you wake up and your old lady's telling you, you know, you got butt ass naked at the club. You was running around down the street with a candle in one hand and a hammer in the other hand, screaming, butt naked and screw the world. And you don't remember none of that shit, you got a problem. That's easy to tell. But if you go to a family's function and your lady says, okay, babe, when we go in there, we're only going to have a couple of drinks tonight, okay? And you say, sure, baby, I promise. And then you go in there and you have 3 or 4 drinks. Then you end up saying something that's inappropriate and maybe altering the joy of the evening. That's the same type of negative impacts that demonstrate that you cannot predict when you're going to start, how much you're going to use, and when you're going to stop, as running around butt-ass naked with a candle and a hammer in your hand. And those are the markers of the disease of addiction. And I heard you on an earlier podcast wonder whether it's a disease or whether people are born addicted. And I agreed with you guys' your guys' comments that in recovery, it really doesn't make a difference why or how we got here. But the reality is that if you look at it, there is a science base to this. There is a medical model to this. And the reality is that if somehow or another you look around and there's addiction or abuse in your history, you certainly have the gene that can open up. And there's a whole bunch of people that it passes, that it skips over, or that are able to manage it because they never get started. But there's a majority of people that open up that gene and it ends up taking them to the next phase. And I want to say this and preface this. You know, society sells this idea through its media that everybody that's addicted and everybody that uses is in addiction, and that we have this huge problem throughout society. And the reality is that there's only 7% of our population that struggle with abuse and addiction. So it's clear there's a whole bunch of examples around you. If you're struggling with understanding, there's a whole bunch of examples around you of people who can handle having just a drink in a social situation. And if you don't look like those people, then the answer is already there for you. Take a look at it and do something. Because the rewards of being clean, the rewards of living a life that allows you to reach your fullest potential are phenomenal. And everybody deserves to have it. Yeah?
Yeah. Perfect. I think that's where we'll leave it. Man, Rich, I appreciate this time, man. Like that was, you say it better than anybody I've ever met, right? And I appreciate you. Again, I'm lucky that I have you in my life, man. So I appreciate you and thank you for this.
So let me say this, brother. I've been honored and grateful throughout the years that we've known each other, for our interaction, for the ability that you've given me to be a part of your life, to see inside that, you know. And I think more importantly, what I've come to realize is that the moments that we experience are precious because they'll never happen again. They become perfect because they're in and of themselves a moment in time. And what we've shared in those moments are precious and perfect, brother. You know, we don't get a chance to change. And in you, if you're listening to this podcast, man, I want you to follow this young brother. I've watched him do some things that are important, that are about giving back, and that acknowledges the fact that he's not perfect, and acknowledges the fact that he's on a journey to seek wellness, to give back, to be an asset to his community, to be an asset to his family. And brother, you a young man that I respect. So, you know, I'm honored that we've been able to share this over the years. You've been there for me, man, in your business. I mean, when my father-in-law died, and I came over there with my family and said, yo, EJ, I need this arrangement for my father, and I don't know what to do. In that time of grief, brother, I watched how gentle you were with my mother-in-law, with my wife. Man, you're a good dude, and I love you, brother.
Love you too, man. We always end this with a hug.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rich. Oh, that was awesome.
Yeah.